Hello everyone and welcome to the Node.js tutorial from Edureka. I'm Ravi Valiath and I'm your trainer for today. Let's check out the agenda for today. So if we see the agenda, we would see that what Node.js is. We'll see the Node.js architecture. We would see what Node.js package manager, that is NPM, is, Node.js modules, what is a package JSON file. Then we'd go more into Node.js Basics, which is any language basics that is there. We will also move into the file systems. There is an FS module in Node.js that would enable us to read file and write files on our server. And then there is an events module in Node.js. There is also something called HTTP module, and there is also something called Express that we would be going for, which is a Node.js framework. So at the end, we would be going through the entire code and we'd be going through a small demo as well, which would be something of a mix of all the Node.js concepts that we go forward to. So let's go ahead and see what Node.js is actually. So if we speak about Node.js, it's a powerful JavaScript framework, or I might say it's a runtime where you can run JavaScript on the console. It is developed on Chrome's V8 engine. So if anyone doesn't know what a V8 engine is, let me just tell you what it is. So if I check out the v8.dev, the official website of Chrome's V8 engine, you would see that it is an open source high performance JavaScript and WebAssembly engine written in C++. And more or less, this is the engine that runs on the Chrome browser. So you would see that whatever your Chrome browser understands, it would be the same thing that Node.js also understands. So the creator of Node.js thought that, okay, this is an open source JavaScript engine. Why not implement that in a platform which enables you to run JavaScript on the server? So this is the reason why Node.js understands JavaScript. So that is one thing that we would like to also keep in mind. So it's something that runs on Chrome's V8 engine, and it compiles JavaScript natively into the machine code. That is all because of Chrome's V8 compiler that we have. And it is basically used for creating server-side web applications and also network applications actually. So mainly Node.js is used for. And basically if it is a data-intensive application, Node.js is something that is specifically made for that. Let's see how that happens basically. If we talk about the features of Node.js, it is open source. It is simple and fast. It is asynchronous. Highly scalable. You would face no problems in scaling your Node.js application. It basically works on something called a microservice architecture as well, and it facilitates that microservice architecture really well. It is a single-threaded model, which means it is not resource intensive, and yet it is fast, yet it allows things to be done in parallel. We'll see how that is done. And then there is no buffering. Basically, there is no waiting as far as Node.js is concerned. And that is because of a concept in JavaScript, which is called event loop. We'll see more about that as well. And it works on so many platforms. So that is some brief of the feature. Let's see Node.js architecture. And before going into the architecture of Node.js, we would also like to see the traditional architecture. So traditional architecture, if we speak about traditional server architecture, is basically where every client request is managed by separate threads. So there is a multi-threaded model going on. In normal server architectures like Java, for example, it's a multi-threaded application or a multi-threaded setup altogether. So where your web application runs on multiple threads and various client requests are processed parallelly. Now, there is nothing to take away from this model because it is really good and it has been working throughout years when Java is, at this point of time, Java is actually one of the best languages and secure languages to be programmed in. However, this is resource intensive because you can see that there are so many threads going on in parallel, which means your server or your machine should be something which is capable of running these many threads. However, if you talk about Node.js, it only runs on single thread and still it processes requests in parallel. So one thing that I would also like to clarify here is in the background, or maybe under the hood if you may say, Node.js doesn't process any request in parallel, but it goes through an event loop where once the request comes, it goes into the process and Node.js doesn't wait for the output of the request to come in while it takes in the next request. So as and when the first request, for example, gets the output, it would just respond for the output or with the output to the respective client basically. So, in the background or under the hood, it is basically running only one thread, which is not resource intensive, and it is at the same time processing requests from so many clients. And it provides a virtual feel that everything is running in parallel, but everything is not. So that is all because of event loop that is going on. So that is basically the architecture. And then we talk about something very important as far as Node.js is concerned, which is called Node Package Manager. Now, it is called NPM in short, and it was primarily known as Node Package Manager. But nowadays, it is not known as Node Package Manager because it is doing so many things than package management. It's doing so many other things as well. We'll see what it is. So if we talk about the official definition, it's a package manager for Node.js packages or modules, which has been added as a default installation from Node.js version 6 or 0.6 onwards, and then it's stuck. It is already there in any installation that you do in Node.js. If you are a Java programmer, you can relate this with Maven. And if you're a PHP programmer, you can relate it with Composer. So it is the same mechanism where NPM has a repository of so many libraries, and then the repository serves whatever the package you need for your project. And if we talk about the features, it provides and hosts online repositories for Node.js, which can easily be downloaded in our project using a command line. So it provides a command line utility as well, and it also allows you to manage the repositories or the versions of libraries that your project may use. So we'll see what are the versions and what are the libraries that we are talking about. So the libraries that I'm talking about, when I say libraries, it is just Node.js modules. So Node.js modules, or if we talk about the module system, there are core modules, there are local modules, and then there are third-party modules. So core modules are the ones that are actually available in the default installation of Node.js. You don't have to program anything, you don't have to install anything else, just Node.js to get the core modules working. Few of them are listed in here like HTTP, URL, query string. We'll be using them, and there are some others as well which we'll be using today. And then local modules. It is something that a programmer builds. It could be a function, it could be an object, it could be anything. The programmer builds and the programmer exports so that other team members or other programmers can import that module and use them. So it's something that a programmer would build. It's like a custom module. And then third-party module. This would be installed through the NPM repository. So if we speak about NPM in this particular case, let me just also open up the NPM website. So it is basically npmjs.com. And you can see that it has so many repositories. There are so many companies that it is serving and all. There are so many repositories available as well. Let's just search a few repositories in this particular case. I'll search one of them. If we talk about React, you might have heard of React. React is one of the repositories that is available in NPM. You might have heard of Angular. That is also one of the libraries that is available in the NPM repository. You might have heard of jQuery. You might have heard of Bootstrap. These are like naming just a few of them. There are so many repositories that are available. Even Express that we are going to use is one of the libraries that is available in this particular repository of NPM. So you can see here that Express is one of the libraries that is to be used. So we'll be installing Express and see. By the way, this is the way you install any third-party library from the NPM repository. All right. So that is the third-party modules, and you would be using npm install or npm-i to be in short to install this particular repository. Now let us see the package.json file. Package.json file in Node.js is the heart of the entire application. It is basically the manifest file that contains the metadata of the project. Now at this point of time, let me just create a Node.js project and see what this package.json file looks like, and then we'll analyze what this file actually is. So let me just create a folder here, Edureka, and in this folder, I'm willing to initialize a Node.js project. So let's say I'll call it Node.js demo, or maybe I'll call it task manager, even better. We'll try to create some of the task manager functionalities in here, and it'll be an API that will be creating or a web service that will be creating. We'll see what it is. So in this task manager, I'm going to initialize a Node.js project. And in order to initialize a Node.js project, you need to have Node.js installed in your computer, which means you have to go to the nodejs.org website and you can download this LTS version. This is a current release, which is basically experimental. It'll have all the latest features, but it is prone to be erroneous at some time. So, generally for development, you don't use this one, but you use this one. But say if you want to check out the new features, you can also install the current release, but we'll always go with the LTS. And I already have this installed. Clicking on this will allow you to download the MSI file, that is the setup file, and then you can just double click on that setup and just install it on Windows. And in Mac as well, the setup is really simple. And in Linux as well, probably it'll give you a deb file, for example, if you're going for Ubuntu. So the setup of Node.js would be really straightforward. But after the setup is done, what you have to do is you have to just check whether Node.js is installed in your computer or not. And you'd be checking it this way. Node-v. That'll give you the version of Node.js. And you can see that I already have it installed and I have the version 10.15.3, that is the LTS. And then I'd also check npm. If you recall, we saw that npm is something that comes in inherently with Node.js altogether. So we'll be going for npm-v. That will give you the npm version. So we're all set and we're all ready to go. So let's go for creating or initializing a Node.js project. It is something like this: npm init dot, which means current directory. So if we just hit enter, I think dot is something that is not to be done. Right. So this would ask you certain questions like, what is the package name? Let's say I want the same package name as Task Manager. I want the version to be 1. Okay. The description, let's say this is a Task Manager project. All right. Entry point would not be significant at this point of time, so we'll just keep it as it is. No test command as of now. No Git repositories. I'm not going to even commit that to a Git repository, and no keywords as well. Author, I can say Edureka. And license, no meaning as of now for a license because we are not going to make it public or anything. So it tells us that is it okay, and also it tells you that it's about to write to this particular file, package.json, inside our Task Manager folder. So which means after I say yes, there is a possibility of this being written into a file called package.json inside my project. So let's go for hitting enter. Let's say yes. And if I now check out my folder, you'll see that the package.json file is in. Let's just open this up in our editor. You see that here is the package.json available with every information that we provided. Now, this is a very basic package.json. There'll be so many things inside a package.json file. And a normal or a real world package.json might look something like this, where there are so many things like the name of the project is there. Then there is something called version as well, description of the project, what is the starting point of the project, which is your main script to run first. There are certain scripts. We saw that we didn't provide any test command. And then there are certain engines. What all tools do you use to run this project? Who is the author? What is the license? There are certain third-party modules that we would like to have. You can see in this particular example that there is Express that is there as a third-party module which we'll be using. And then there is dev dependencies. Like when you go into a development environment, like for example, our computer, there will be certain dependencies that will be there and that will be listed inside the dev dependency. Then there is repository related information, which we didn't provide actually. If you want to see what are the bugs and all, there has to be a separate URL and the homepage. So that is your package.json file, which got created, by the way, when we initialized the Node.js project. And you can also manually create it, but it's better that we go for npm init as a process. So now let's go for Node.js Basics. So if we talk about basics, it's like any language basics. And the main thing that we need to check out as a basic is the data types. So there are certain primitive data types, there are certain abstract data types like non-primitive data types. So primitive data types are string, number, boolean, null, and undefined. Abstract data types are object, array, and date, to name a few, by the way. There are so many others, but these are to name a few. So say for example, if I create an application, let's just create a string as a variable and let's see how that works. So let me just create an app.js file, and in this I'll create a variable and I'll be very specific. I'll say first name and I'll say first name to be Edureka. So this is a variable that we declared. And if I want to show this variable in my console, I'll just do console.log first name. So when I do this, the main perception is basically if I want to run this app.js, I might have to create an HTML file where I might have to include this app as a script file. And then I might have to execute the HTML file and open the console to see this particular output. But if you have installed Node.js on your computer, which we have, you'd actually be able to run this particular app.js really easily. Let's run this one. For that, I would have to go into my project. Let me just clear the screen and run this one. And really simple to run a Node.js application. It's simply node and the file name, that is app.js. And you can see that it displays the first name in my console. So whatever I do as console.log gets displayed in my terminal. That is something that I would like to keep in mind. And remember, this is a string that we have created, but there's no concept of a strict data type. So basically the first name can also be something like this. A first name can be reassigned to, let's say, a number. And that will not be a problem for JavaScript. That is the core nature of JavaScript. It's not strictly typed. So that is something that I would also like you to keep in mind. So there are so many data types that are available, which we have created a string, and then there are so many others. This is how you create a variable that we already saw. And then there are operators. Now, as I said, like there is something that is already similar to all the other programming languages. Variables are one of them, operators as well. However, there is one operator that is pretty unique, and that is the triple equal to sign. So say, for example, if I go for something like this, var, let's say, age 1 is equal to 30, and var age 2 is equal to 30. And then let's say var result is equal to age 1 double equal to age 2. Now I'm using this double equal to similar to any other binary operator. Like I might go for plus, and similarly I'm going for double equal to. Now this is because this is a comparison operator. This would return either true or false, and this would get stored inside the result variable. So this time I know that you might have guessed it. It would be returning us true. And if I do the result, if I go for console log of result, and if I execute this app.js, you see that it returns as true. Now, if I go for a string, all right, and when I declared a variable in the previous example, we saw that there is no strict data type. So this would not actually check for the data type. This will just check the value. And though it may seem that it should give us false, this would give us true. And the fact is, like, JavaScript doesn't care about data types. So if, say, for example, you want to also compare the data types along with the value, instead of double equal to, use triple equal to. And that way, this would give us false. There is so much going on inside, or in this particular two examples that we have. But for now, you can remember that double equal to doesn't compare the data types, while triple equal to also checks the data types. But then again, there is so much going on under the hood, which it's not in the scope of this particular session. But just keep this in mind. There's a unique operator that is available for JavaScript specifically. And then there are certain other languages that might have these operator, but JavaScript is the one that came up with this. All right, so this is one thing. And by this time, you might have got an idea on how we run an application or how we run a file in Node.js. So this is one other thing that I would also like to mention, where functions are created. Say, for example, if I have a function to create, let's say function, say hello, and I pass in name inside it, and I return, let's say hello plus name. Now plus here is a concatenation operator, and that will return us a name or a hello message with the name, whatever we have passed in. So I can do this like console.log, say hello, and let's say hello to Ravi. All right. So if I run this particular file, it'll give me whatever output we expect, which is fine. Now, one thing I would also like to tell you is, in JavaScript, there is a provision where you can create a function without a name, an anonymous function, which is also something that JavaScript came up with, a function with no name. And if this is the case, then how would you call the function? So for that, you can do something like this, var say hello is equal to a function, something like this. And then the rest of the thing remains the same. Function gets called as normal. What we have done is we have created a variable, and inside this variable, we have assigned a function rather than a value. So, and then we are calling the variable as a function. So again, if I run this particular code, the output would be the same. Just keep in mind that function here can be anonymous in JavaScript. All right. And then objects. Now object, there are two ways you can create objects. One is through object literals like var, let's say student is equal to a constant object, which has, let's say, name Ravi and email ravi@gmail.com, for example, right? And then we can do something like this, console.log student.name, right? And then student.email and so on. and that would display whatever the name is basically. So an object.property can be done. And then there is a constructor pattern as well available, but it's okay if we don't go for that. But then there is another pattern which uses object constructor to create an object. Now going into Node.js core modules. One of the modules is file system, that is the FS module. FS module, if you want to include, or any module, if you want to include, you go for this syntax. A variable is equal to require and the module name. And this would be something like this. For example, var fs is equal to require fs. Now for this fs module, you don't have to install anything else, but Node.js has to be there, and which is there. And fs module would be available. It's a core module in Node.js. So let's say, for example, if I have a file called hello.txt and it has some data, all right? And if I want to read this file, I'd be able to do this like fs.read file, and it asks me the path of the particular file. So let's just give the path basically. I can try with a relative path first. So it'll be basically hello.txt. Let's see what it gets. And the second argument that we need to pass is the callback function. So Node.js or any JavaScript platform would work more on the basis of callback function. That's how it creates the virtualization of so many things working at the same time. All right, so I would go for a callback function, and this function, anonymous function, would go for two arguments. One is error and one is data. Let's see, if there is no error, then we'd go for logging the data inside the console. Let's see what data we get. All right, so if I run this file now, hopefully I should get the contents of hello.txt file. Let's see. Here, I don't get the content, but I get something called a buffer. That buffer is basically some container that contains raw data. Out of this buffer, I can get the string basically. So let's say if we go for buffer.toString, which is a function which will convert the data to a string. So now it'll give me whatever the content hello world has. And similarly, if I, for example, have to write something inside a file, let's say if I want to write something inside a file, and then once the file is written, I would like to read out the file, we do something like this. fs.writeFile, and writeFile would again go for the path, and I would be going for the data as well. And the data is something like this. And once I go for the data could be any data type, by the way, could be Boolean, could be object, could be any data type. And then I go for a callback function. Now the callback function would have something, only one argument here, which is error. If there is no error, like if no error, then I would like to read the file, right? So then I can go for fs.read file. So I can just take this whole thing and I can put it in here. So what I have done is I have written something into the file, and if there is no error after writing whatever I have written, I would be trying to read that file. And in here, if there is no error, I would like to display the content. So hopefully this should give me how are you, or maybe let's see whether it overrides, whether it appends. Let's see what happens. If I check out this, you can see it gives me how are you. And if I go into hello.txt, you can see that it has overwritten the particular content that was there before. So this is an FS module demo. This is how you'd be reading and writing files. I might like to also try and read and write JSON in some JSON file. That might actually give me a feel of an API that is being created. Let's see how that goes. And then there is something called events. But before going for events, I would like to create a server first. So let's just create a server. And the events are basically something that we would be working with, where we would be emitting certain events and then we'll be listening to those events. Let's see how that whole mechanism works and how the event handlers would work and all. But before events, I would like to go into creating the server through the HTTP module, because server is also a network application, which is something that Node.js would enable us to create. So we'll create a server through the HTTP modules, and then I'll come back to the events. Let's see how that goes. All right. So let's just get rid of this FS related code, and I'll again go for the FS code in some time. I would also get rid of the hello.txt. I don't need this. Right. And then what I'll do is I'll create a server in here. So for the server, I'll go for var HTTP is equal to require HTTP. And then there is something which is really simple to create a server. In Node.js, as opposed to all the other languages, the server is something that a programmer would create. So say, for example, if you compare Node.js with JSP or Java, there is Tomcat Apache web server that is already available. If you compare Node.js with .NET, there is IIS server that is already available. If we talk about PHP, there is Apache server that is already there, compiled and available. In Node.js, there is no server. So the concept of Node.js being a server, it's something that is not true. In Node.js, it is just a runtime which enables us to run JavaScript on your machine so that you can create a server if you want to. And creating a server, it's not a big deal in Node.js. This is how you create a server. http.create server. That's it. And I'd save it in a variable called server. And my server would listen to the port number 3000. The server.listen 3000. All right. So this is what your server would listen to. And if you want, you can also provide the host name here, which is by default localhost. But if you want explicitly, you can provide localhost as the host name. So your server would be listening to localhost and 3000. And after it, starts listening, I would also like to provide a message. And again, the callback function or an anonymous function would come into the picture. So function console log will go for server started on port 3000, right? Okay. So what have we done? We have simply created a server by HTTP create server, and we are listening on port number 3000. So that is what it is. And then at the end, we are displaying some message on the console. So let's see. One thing that you'd notice is in the other programs, the application actually ended. Like once you are done with the whole program, you see that you get the command prompt back. But in this case, when we are listening, the server is constantly listening to the port number 3000. So the application would not end in this particular case. You may have to end the application forcefully by hitting Control C. So let's see. Now, if I run it, you see that server started on port number 3000 and the application is not ending. All right. So if I go for, say, localhost port number 3000, there'll be something that might happen. You see here that the request is sent to the server. The server is not responding because we have not programmed our server to respond with something. So here the server is not responding while the server is running. All right. So if I stop my server, you would see it would tell you that the site can't be reached. So basically what that meant was previously the server was running. So if I, for example, run the server, this would again, let me just open up localhost 3000. This would again start to load, but the message that the site can't be reached won't come because the server is still there. The site is reached, but the server is not responding to us. So let's program our server so that it responds to us, in which you go for a callback function inside your create server method. And this callback function has two things, request and response, two arguments. And if I want to send a response in this particular case, you go for response.end, all right? And if I, let's say, server works, that's the message that I want to send. All right. So what this would do is this would send a message to your browser saying server works. So let's just take that message. So for that, because I have changed something in my app.js, I might have to stop this and I might have to restart my server. So server listening on port 3000. And if I now refresh, you'd see that it gives me the message server works. So this is pretty cool. We have created a server in like almost 3 statements, right? So that is something on how you create a server. But generally what people do is people use this functionality of creating a server along with Express and then create a server through Express, the framework that we were talking about. So we will see how to create a server through Express. But before that, let's move back to the events and let's see how events would work in this particular case. Now, when you talk about events, there are 2 methods that you would be generally going for. One is called emit and one is called on. So remember these 2 methods, emit and on. Let's see how we can make it work and what are events basically, or how an evented system would work. So in that case, we again use a core module, which is called events. So var events is equal to require events. Again, a Node.js core module. You don't have to do anything to include this one. And in this particular case, we'd also create an event emitter. So var event emitter is equal to events dot event emitter, and it should be a new event emitter actually, right? Now, if we go for the presentation, you would see that they have also emphasized on two things, that is on and emit. So we will see what these things are. All right. So now in this particular case, let's go for something called event.on. Now event.on, or not event.on actually, event emitter.on. Now this function, it's basically an event listener. Now whenever an event occurs, this function would listen to that particular event. All right. So this would listen to the event, and event.on, we would have the name of the event, and let's see what we can do as a function. There's a callback function that is also something that is involved in here. So we will see event emitter where it'll go for event.on and something inside as arguments. But as of now, I'll just keep it this way, and I'll simply go for something on the emit side of things. I would like to emit an event, and let's see how that goes. All right. So in this particular case, what I would do is whenever there is some request on the server, I would like to emit an event, and then I would like to listen to the event and log something on the console. All right. So let's see. In this particular case, I'll go for event emitter.emit, and I can name the event anything. The event that I'm trying to, emit is basically someone has requested to the server. So what I would say is on request, maybe just someone. I can name it anything. That's why I'm naming it a very bizarre name. So someone requested, that is an event name. And if I want, I can pass in some data as well. But as of now, I'll just keep it this way. I'll just emit someone requested. And when I would like to do something when someone requested, so I would go for event emitter.on, someone requested, and function. That is a callback function. Let's just go for console.log. And I'll just say a request has been done on the server. Something like this on the console. All right. So this is an event emitter, and basically on is an event listener. All right. So we are triggering an event, or maybe I can call event trigger. That'll be a better name. So this is an event trigger, and this is an event listener. So event emitter.emit is an event trigger, and event emitter.on is an event listener. So whenever this would be triggered, this event would be executed, and this function would be executed. So let's see. So if I now rerun my server, because I have changed something in my Node.js app, I'd have to rerun this. It says server started on port 3000. I'll just refresh, and it'll give me server works. That is fine. But if I check out on the console, you'll see that a request has been done. If I refresh again, you'll see that a request has been done. And then there are two requests. That is because one is checking whether the method get is available on the server or not, and the other request is basically executed with the method get actually. So there are two requests, but we don't need to go into detail in that particular case. However, one thing is for sure, that whenever the event emitter is triggered, we can execute the on method and we can listen to that particular event. All right. And if, say, for example, I want to pass in some data, let's say test, right? And this data can be taken into the function, the anonymous function, as an argument, and I can just display that, for example, data. That should display test to me. So whatever you pass in, could be a string, could be a boolean, an object, anything, could be taken into the function as an argument. You can name it anything, and you can display that particular argument as well inside the console. Let's rerun our program, and let's refresh. The server is requested, and you can see request has been done on the server, and test. This particular data is also being displayed. So that is the event emitter. You can emit events and you can listen to events. Whenever the event would be emitted, the listening would happen. All right. So this way, our Node.js server becomes an evented server. And this is really good if we want to create a chat application or any real-time application. Event handling would actually help us create a good real-time application. So that is where this would basically come into the picture. So, you can check out Socket.io. There is a library called Socket.io, which helps you to create a chat server. This would heavily use event emitter on and emit methods. All right. So this is the one. Now, we have created the server using the HTTP module. And if we talk about the server, you can always see that the client would be either a web browser, a mobile browser, or an application that might request to your web server. The web server would contain your server file, that is the app.js that we created, plus some application logic as well if we want. And the logic might be taking data from the data layer or any external system, and it might be serving the request back to the client. So basically, this data would be taken into the business layer and to the web server, and the web server would respond, like response.end sort of a thing would happen in this particular case. So this is how the request and response cycle would go on. And then we see here that it's creating a web server using Node.js. You can pause this particular portion and you can also try out this whole thing. I think you would know how a server is created. You already know that. And then there are certain other things that are listed in here, which you can try. Now we'd go for a third-party module or a third-party package, you may say, or even we can call it a library. It is called Express.js. And Express.js, it is a Node.js framework, which is basically facilitating the management of data flow and routing as well. It is very lightweight. And nowadays, if you create a Node application for an API or a web server, Express.js is something that you would definitely have. So it's like basically the part of the language itself right now. It facilitates faster application development. It provides applications with template engines. Two of them are Jade, which is nowadays which is known as Pug, and EJS, two of the very popular ones, but then there are so many others. It helps, building single page applications, building multi-page applications as well. It helps you to connect with any database, MySQL, MongoDB, Redis, etc. The configuration is really simple. We'll see how you create a server in Express. It's really simple. And it also helps you to handle errors, or maybe it gives you a good facility to define error handling processes so that your maintainability of the application is something that would work. So let's just create a demo in Express and let's see how that goes. And as I said, I'd be using HTTP and Express together to create a server. That is an ideal way of doing it. So let's just get rid of everything and let's just start with the Express server. For that, I'd have to include Express. Var Express is equal to require Express. Now, when I do this and if I execute this, you might expect that this might work. But remember, Express is a third-party library. It's a third-party module. So in that case, you would have to install that particular module on your system. Obviously, if I run this, let's say if I try to run this, this will give me an error. Cannot find the module Express. So let's install Express in here. In order to install Express, and remember the file structure that we have an app.js file, a package.json. There is nothing else in here. So let's just install Express. Let's say npm install Express. You can go for install the whole word or I as a short form. It's all fine. I'd install Express, and this would actually download Express from the npm repository and install it on your local machine. And you'd be able to also see where that Express exactly gets installed. So you can see that Express is installed, 48 packages installed, all right. And now you can see a change in the file structure. There was already package.json and app.js in my file system, while there is a folder called Node Modules created and package_lock.json also created. So Node Modules folder would actually have the library Express. And then there are so many other libraries that Express depends on, which are also imported and installed. So now if I execute this will not give me an error. However, we have not created a server. We have not listened to a port number. So we'd be doing that through Express. Let's do that. What we would do is Express and brackets, like we are calling Express as a function, and we'd be saving it in server, a variable called server. So this is how you create a server in Express. Pretty simple. And what we would do is server.listen 3000, and then the same drill, like 3000. I'd not specify localhost because I know that it is localhost. And at the end, a function that tells that the server is listening to 3000. So console log server listening to port 3000. All right. So the Express is required, like included. A server is created and the server is listening now. Let's just rerun the application. And because the server is listening, the application would not stop. It'll keep on listening. And let's go into our browser and let's refresh. Now, this time around, when we refresh, you'd not get that whole loading thing, but instead you'd get an error. And it says that it cannot get slash. This is actually not an error on the server side. The server is all okay. The thing is that we have not programmed our server in a way that it would address the GET request on the root path. This is our root path. So there is no GET request addressed on the root path. That's what it says. So what we'll do is we'll address the GET request. Like we'll do something like this. We'll go for server.get. Well, actually, rather than naming it a server, because I would like to use this server identifier somewhere else in some time, I'll go for app. And I'll go for app.listen this time around. All right. So app, and this also tells you that you don't have to name it server. You can name it anything that you want. So this is my Express app, and app.get slash and a function, request and response, the same request response function that we had, but it is now specifically for the root path. And in here, I can go for response dot, either I can go for end or I can go for send. And response.send, let's say Express works. I can also, let's say, have an h1 tag so that our browser displays it as a heading. That can be done. And now let's rerun the application, and hopefully the root path GET request is addressed. So let's go for it. I'll stop this, rerun the application. By the way, there is a utility called nodemon, which would help you to run your application automatically once there are some changes. But this time around, we'll just, rerun the application manually. So if I now refresh, you'll see that it gives you an H1 which says Express works. So which means this is all done. Your root path is addressed. Your root GET request is done. But what I would like to do is I would like to go for something called tasks. Okay. There is no route that is tasks that is defined yet. We're not programmed our application so that it addresses the GET request on the tasks. In this GET request, let me just go for the GET request first. So app.get slash tasks is what I want to have the server address, and function request and response. So now I can go for response.send. I can go for another H1 which says tasks work. If I now restart my server, and remember to stop my server, I'm just pressing in Control-C. And if you're a Mac user, it's Command-C. That is stopping the server. And now if I refresh, you'll see that tasks work. Now this works. Now what we have done here is we have created two routes. One is app.get for the root, and one is app.get for the tasks. It could be app.post, it could be app.put, app.delete, app.patch. Anyone who is familiar with the REST API would be familiar with all these words. Your server can address any request: get, put, post, delete, patch, any request that you want to address. Here we are just going for GET request. All right. So now what I would like to do in here is I would like to return something from a file. Like for example, I'd create something called db.json. It's a JSON file. And in this JSON file, I'd like to go for, let's say, a key called tasks. And tasks would be basically an array of tasks, which would be learn Node.js. Now in JavaScript, you can create an array with square brackets. Similarly, in JSON syntax, that'll work. Let's say learn JavaScript, learn Express. So these are the three tasks that I have. And what I would like to do is from this JSON file, I would like to read these three tasks and I would like to return them as a response. So let's see what we do in this particular case. Let's see how that works. And that response has to be in this particular case, right? In this particular response.send, I'd like to read the file and then send the response. So we know that what we use for reading the files, which is the fs module. And also we know what we use to create a server as well. Here we have created a server by Express, but generally people always use a mix of Express and HTTP to create a server. Let's see how that happens. What I'll do is, first I'll go for HTTP. It's equal to require HTTP. And for this, we don't have to install anything. It's a core module. And I'd go for var server is equal to HTTP dot create server. Right? And app is something that I'll be passing in as an argument. So my server is created, which has all the goodness of Express. So instead of app.listen, I'll go for server.listen. All right. Again, this will all stay the same. It'll listen to the port 3000 and then go for a message that the server is listening to port 3000 and so on and so forth. So what we have done is we have included Express, we have included HTTP, we have created an Express app, we have created a server with the create server method, and we have passed on the Express app as an argument, which means all these routes would be something that would be addressed. And then at the end, we are listening to port 3000. Now, this is the common way that people would use to create a server and an Express app together. All right. So now let's rerun our program. Let's see what happens. It gives me an error, and that is a typo. So let me just resolve that. Right. And now let me just rerun the program. Server, again, listening to port 3000. This would not probably give me anything. You can see that it is still loading because there's no response that I have programmed in here, which I would like to. But say, for example, if I go to my root path, it gives me Express works. So that is all working fine, which is cool actually to be using Express and Node.js server together. All right, so now I'd like to read from the db.json. So obviously I would need var fs is equal to require fs. And in here, I'd go for fs.read file. I'd go for the path that is db.json, the relative path, and the callback, which has two things as far as read file is concerned. One is error and one is data. Let's go for console.log, or not even console.log. Let's just do a response.send. Once you have the data, you go for data.toString would be something that we'd be going for. Let's see what we get in this particular case. I would have to restart my server, and this works. And if I go for tasks, this gives me an object that has an array of tasks. So I don't like to have the whole object, but I just want the array of tasks to be there. So one would think that, okay, I can do something like this. Like, let's say var tasks is equal to data.toString.tasks. That is the object that we want to get. But the thing is, like, this toString would convert the whole data to a string, which would not have that property called task. So if I want to convert this string to a JSON, I'd like to do something like JSON.parse. It's one of the core JavaScript methods. This would then have the property called task. So JSON.parse data.toString, which we are passing in as an argument, and that will convert this string to a JSON. And then I'm going for tasks as a property. At the end, I can simply send in tasks. So that'll give me the plain array that we require. All right. And specifically, if I want to send JSON, I'll just do response.json rather than going for response.send. So I'm being specific in here. So let's just stop this and start the app again and refresh. And now you see that you get the array. Now you might not get the same output that I'm getting as far as the color is concerned, because I have an extension which is running in my Chrome browser. That is a JSON reader or something like that. I had installed it years ago. So that is the thing. But the more important thing is you're getting the plain array from the file that we have. So in this case, we have used almost all the things that we have learned. We went for Express, we went for HTTP, combined. It was a server that was created, and then the FS module to read something from the file. This would probably be something that we would like to go for from a database. Like, we'd like to get a database connectivity done and get all the data in and then read data from this particular case. But as of now, read file would be enough, and this might give you a good introduction to Node.js. So this is what it is. And further down, you can try out more routing and more database connectivity in Node.js. See how that goes for you, and stay in touch. Thank you, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!